Well, hello everybody. Either good morning or good afternoon if you're in North America. Good evening if you're tuning in Europe or from the Middle East. Larry Wilson here from Safestart, and we have the expert panel with us from North America. We're also joined by Dr. Wadaganem from the Middle East, and I met Dr. Wada first at a conference in Prague. We were then on an expert panel together in Delhi for the Gas Association conclave there for all the gas and oil companies in India. And then we were on an expert panel again in Kuwait just a month afterwards. So um, Dr. Wada has also been on the expert panels with me in the Middle East and Asia. So he's going to try to not only give us a bit of perspective on leadership from that region, in his own company, which is Emirates National Oil Company, sort of the director of continuous improvement, and there's a number of other things there, but former director of health and safety there. So Dr. Watt, again, thank you very much for joining us. Ed Stevens from ABB, if you've been on the tuned into these expert panels before, Ed's been almost on all of them. And also David Bianco from Epiroc has also been with us. And again, you guys, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Peter Batronis, former director of health, safety, environment, and I believe security for AES. And I'll let all of these gentlemen just tell you a bit about their company in case you weren't familiar with it. And if you've been with us before, Teg Matthews, he works with us in sort of North America business development. Teg has got, I guess for the last 8 or 9 months almost now, Teg has been working with 50 or 60 different companies per month. So it's not always the same companies, probably over 100 now in total, in terms of different focus groups and different topics. Leadership and felt leadership, in other words, is the message actually making it down to the people at the shop floor. So Teg certainly had a lot of feedback and dialogue with these companies on this subject. So just in case you're tuning in for the first time, and there are 570 plus people registered here. So thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. But the first session was complacency in COVID. It's not over till it's over, and unfortunately, it's not over yet. So I will ask a couple of you, just Ed and David. Ed's from Florida, David's from Texas, so just a bit of an update on COVID. And maybe Wada, you could give us a bit from the Middle East, although I think things are going okay from the last webinar. But the next webinar we did then was on leading indicators. What do you rely on? Some very interesting things were uncovered, not just in North America, but in Asia and in the Middle East. We all had examples of where the leading indicators, the near miss reports, the hazard IDs, the inspections, the audits, the risk assessments were all going, if you will, in the right direction, and the quality wasn't degrading. We all had good examples of the injuries and the incidents coming down, fairly reliably, actually. But interestingly enough, when I turned it around and just innocently, actually, just said, does anybody have an example where the leading indicators were going south and you got the company to make a significant change or a pivot? There was, like, it's not like there were no examples, but there were very few compared to what we thought, like one in 30 years, I think you were saying, Wada, you knew of, or something from the Middle East panel. So we were all a bit, kind of a bit surprised at that. Anyhow, it's early, but we're We're also learning new things as well with this. Certainly the next one on zero harm, and should you have zero harm in your mission statement or not. Again, another interesting finding was that if you wanted your employees to take safety home 24/7 on the road with them, it was a little difficult from a communication point of view if all they heard was a 30% decrease in recordable injuries, right? I remember you talking about that ad extensively, saying, it's just a difficult message if all they hear is this 30%. And meanwhile, you're trying to get them to pay more attention when they're at home and when they're on the road, because that's what all the data says the real risk is.
Right.
So we're moving into this one, you guys, in terms of the felt leadership. And so maybe if I could, I started the career 30 years ago, and very much under a company that believed that almost anything was a function of leadership, that there was certainly no ethical concerns about holding leadership accountable for the injuries, with all the people that reported to them. The old folklore was if you wanted to be a manager of this company when they were making explosives, you had to be willing to live at a house at the gatehouse. So if the place blew up, so did your family. So very, very strong commitment to leadership from that company. And theoretically, in almost every situation, you could trace things back to a deficiency within leadership or within the system. But then my wife and I started having children, and when the children could actually walk and then run, no matter how many foam covers and no matter how many padding things and gates we put up on stairways, I couldn't keep my own children from getting hurt. And so I remember having a discussion with a manager of this aforementioned company, and she was adamant about everything being a failure of leadership. And I just said, would you please just come into the room? I got her to listen to the story from one of her employees. He just told it in the class. It was about his brother. He was riding home from school on his bicycle. He turned left. The car didn't see him. And he's been in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down ever since. And she never talked about everything being a failure of leadership again. I'm not really doing the story justice when he tells you the story about his brother. If he gives you the long version, the chances are you'll need Kleenex or a handkerchief. It's powerful. So, and yet I've been in places where the leadership group did not do anything at all, barely the legal minimum. And as you would imagine, the injury rates, including serious injuries, were not anything that anybody would aspire to at all. So, somewhere, somehow, I believe that the baton needs to be passed along, and that would be certainly one of the things, as I mentioned all of you before we got going today, that we'd certainly like to get at a bit in this webinar. But David, let me just start with you. I've met certainly your senior leadership in Sweden. Good, strong leadership certainly. I felt commitment I felt the commitment for safety and safety excellence. But is there more? I mean, is that enough? Just to have that kind of commitment, or do you need to do more than that? And as I mentioned before, since you're just in Texas, maybe just a brief update for all of us on COVID. How's it going there? Are things settling down a bit?
Yeah, Larry, thanks again for having me. Yeah, the Texas situation is definitely improving. It's not where anybody wants it to be, but it's certainly not what it was in July and August. The hospitals definitely are able to take people on now. They were at some critical pressure points, but definitely things are getting managed better. But the governor kind of has continued to extend some of the expectations of best practices around face coverings and things like that, just to, I think partly to instill a habit that says, hey, we're not out of the woods yet, and to avoid that complacency. So I'd say overall, definitely it is a better situation as it has progressed over the last 8 to 12 weeks. Regarding my leadership in Epiroc, the company, the old saying is put your money where your mouth is. And so the company has 2 major programs of the 3 major programs in our safety, health, environment area that are related to behavior, people, and safe, zero harm kind of environments. We have the Safestart implementation, and we have something called live work elimination, which is really big in mines. It's really big. It has a lot to do with line of fire, of course, and these situations where, we have energized hoses, energized machines, energized equipment, things that can come back on somebody, and really raising the awareness and working to eliminate those circumstances as much as possible. And of course, then on the behavioral side, the Safestart is the balancing piece there related to complacency and the other states that are around the errors that occur, which bring us to not being able to deal with those situations until it's too late. The other thing is a big focus on analyzing close calls, looking at near misses. The live work elimination is trying to focus on that so that we can catch these things before they become harmful. So really, really upping the game and upping the perspective and upping the culture related to that perspective is the investment that the company has been taking on this. And then, of course, extending that into COVID, extending those same principles into COVID about complacency and about being in the line of fire, the things that can harm us, and focusing on that. As you know, we have been here locally and internationally we have been. So really it's that package that kind of, the investments there, the focus is there, and it's not just a slogan, it's actually expecting to change a culture. And I think that's the bottom line.
Okay. Well, thanks, David. I want to come back to you again after I get to talk to everybody else here a bit too, because so many of your folks, for those of you who don't know, Epiroc makes mining equipment, and they have operations all over the world. But if you think about mining, everywhere there's mining, there will also be service technicians on their equipment. So I want to come back to you and talk about, how it's obviously just one more, if you will, arm's length away for that message to reach those people at a distance. But let me come to you, Ed. Sort of again, same question. Good, strong leadership at ABB. But is that enough to achieve safety excellence? Do you need to do more? If so, what? And again, since you're in Florida, Ed, just a bit of how it's going there. Not too much. I think it's okay, or settle down a bit. But just let us know, and then if you can, talk about the leadership.
Yeah, so as far as the case rates go in Florida, we're definitely on that downward slope. I just checked it a while ago. They're saying we had reported 2,000 cases for yesterday. So we've been, I think, 10 days below 5,000 cases. Again, you don't know how well you can trust that data. because it gets manipulated quite a bit. But the good news is, you know, as I said the last time we were on this call, you very rarely do you see somebody not wearing a mask when you're out in public, and so that's a big change. The parks just finally hit at that 25% capacity. When you go visit the parks during these last few weeks, you know, they were policing it, you know, making sure that people did the social distancing the best they could, and you know, keep the mask on. So I think it's really making a difference. So I think we're definitely, like David said, we're in a much better place today than we were a month ago. So that's always positive news. As far as leadership goes, you know, we talked about this on the last call. I truly believe that employees do not create culture. They're victims of the culture created by managers, supervisors, senior leaders. So I would, and also to that, I believe your culture is perfectly designed to get the results that you have today. So ABB aggressively in I would say 2016, we put a mark out there, said we want our incident rate to be a 0.8 or at least under a 1.0 or less. And so as a company as a whole, we've done a really good job at case managing and getting our incident rates down to around a 1.0 or less. Then once we got to low incident rates, we realized that leadership, management, decisions, and those things played an important role at keeping those case rates low and to drive the culture to a zero harm culture. And there's a lot of debate whether or not that's real. But if you think about these low incident rates, you have to take the people blame out of the equation. And so that means we develop the FAIR process and distribute that globally. So if we have an incident and then we do the investigation, 99% or 98% of the time, the investigation will focus on the latent conditions that led to that incident, and less than 2% of the time it would be actually that an employee chose to make, you know, they knew the right thing that they were supposed to do, and they made a conscious decision not to do that. So it's a very small percentage of those that do that. So we're taking that people blame away and really taking a hard look at coaching our senior managers and leadership to understand that we have to look at these latent conditions. We have to think about barriers. That's where the Safestart comes in, that stop and take 5. The self-triggering is critical for the human factors piece of that, but that's still the last line of defense. If we're having to rely on the employee to self-trigger, then a lot of things went wrong before we got to that moment in time. So we want to capture that information that we've talked about and find out what's putting the employee in a state of rushing, what's causing the employees to be frustrated, what's causing the employees to be fatigued, and then are we creating a culture that drives the right behaviors moving forward? And if we are, how are we rewarding those employees for those good behaviors?
That's an interesting point, Ed. Years ago, like 12, 13 or something years ago, one of our consultants, his flight from Toronto to Salt Lake City was canceled. So he somehow talked the Air Canada lady into letting him fly to San Francisco, rented a car, and drove all night so he could get there for 8 o'clock in the morning to talk about rushing, frustration, fatigue, and complacency. And I said, Shane, you can't do this. You can't do this. And he said, don't worry, Larry, I self-triggered the whole way. And I said, that's not, it's like, to your point, it's like a last line of defense, but it's a bit like the emergency last line of defense. In other words, you know, when you're in this situation, you can't slow down, you can't get some rest, then it's really handy to be able to self-trigger. But otherwise, it's not what you want day in and day out, right? It's just not very efficient. Now, Pete, you had good leadership at AES for sure. You know, certainly progressive. But again, is that enough? And if it isn't enough, then how much help do you need? You know, if you think about some of the initiatives that David's mentioned, you know, in terms of eliminating live work, which is obviously going to slow things down. It's going to take more time. That will take some leadership behind it to make something like that actually gain traction in the real world. And so, you know, Ed talked about, you know, some of the things, well, Safestart, for instance, that they'd put in place. And obviously that requires, you know, more than just, if you will, waving the flag. So tell me a bit about what the leadership group at AES, you know, what did they do that you thought worked well? And how did they do it?
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for asking me to be part of this panel. And you know, it's so full disclosure for everybody on the call. I left AES about 2 years ago. Most of the perspectives I'm going to be talking about are from my experience at AES, but for the last couple of years, I've been working as an independent consultant in EHS, and a lot of the things that I learned at AES have been validated or even built upon in the last couple of years of my experience. So thanks for that question. And I think, you know, I think everybody on the phone will agree that dedicated senior leadership staff is vital to getting on that path to world-class safety performance, but of course it's not enough. Now, one of the things that we found very valuable was working to get consistency in the communications at all levels of the organization. And I think it's relatively easy at the top, you know, as you go cascading down towards the front lines where the decisions are going to be made. That's where it gets a little more murky. So, you know, we spent time trying to understand and how we could best use our time, our resources, and our knowledge to make sure that those communications at the front lines, where the decisions were being made, you know, to cut corners or, you know, maybe to do a procedure a little bit differently this time are made. It's really the leader's responsibility to be aware that, you know, they kind of create the climate, if you will. They provide the resources, but ultimately they've got to coach the individuals that are working in those hazardous environments to make good decisions and help them identify the habits and skills that are going to make them successful. So we kind of spent a lot of time, you know, once we realized the importance of that frontline leadership and the power of the consistent messaging at that level, we spent a lot of time building those capabilities and helping them be good coaches, not just good managers, but good leaders from a coaching perspective.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so like a little more like, I don't want to be putting words in your mouth, but, you know, roll your sleeves up, get out there, you know, get your hands dirty. I don't, you know, I don't mean do the work for the guys, but get out and engage them a little more at their level out there. Was that sort of one of the things that was effective for them, or was it more a communication, you know, video from the boardroom sort of level kind of thing? I mean, in terms of how it became tangible, how did they do it, Pete?
I'll give you some specific examples, Larry. So we had a safety walk program at AES where leaders, you know, we kind of came to a realization that leaders could be more effective spending more time out on the front lines, engaging folks in safety conversations. So, you know, initially we kind of looked at those as, you know, counting the number, if you will, of how many of them we were doing. But once we started looking at the quality of them, when they were being done, you know, are they, if you have a quota for 4 a month, are they all 4 being done on the last day of the month? Are you going to see high risk activities? Those types of things. So it really started to make leaders aware of kind of the nonverbal messages that they were sending as well. You know, it's one thing to say that you're committed to safety, but we started to identify ways that we could actually demonstrate that. As you mentioned, getting out in the field. If we knew that there was some hazardous work going on, get the leaders involved with job safety analysis and pre-job briefing of that work to make sure that they understand. And that not only helped identify areas where they can more effectively coach the folks that were out working, but also kind of feed that information back into the system so that as policies, strategies, visions were being formed, we had that, invaluable frontline input into that, the engagement into those strategies, which, as you know, part of the continuous improvement process, it provides huge amount of value.
Well, I know you weren't with us in the last panel, Peter, but what David and and Anthony as well were saying is that in terms of the most reliable leading indicators, and Wada and I also heard this from the Middle East panel, was that you going out and talking to people who you believed had their heads screwed on straight in the field, and then looking at the reports, and if the reports matched what the guy who had his ear to the rail was saying, then they would believe the report. So interesting as well at AES. So now, Dr. Wada, before I just ask you, to give us just a brief update on COVID in the Middle East and all, I just want to let everybody know, the first session I heard with Dr. Wada was talking about, governance and leadership at the board of directors level for large companies. He and his partner Robert had just released a book that Bradford had published in the UK, and so I know it wasn't on all of the prep questions, Dr. Wada, but you could also talk a bit, if you wanted to, about leadership at that level as well for health and safety, and just how effective or how detrimental it can be if you don't have it. But just before you launch into all of that, if you give us just a brief update on COVID, and again, like everybody else, is felt leadership enough to get to the people off the job, like 24/7, or do you have to do more, if you will, from a health and safety practitioner point of view?
Okay, Larry, thanks, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure being here online with you guys this evening. It's about 9:30 in the evening here in Dubai, and the temperature's around about 40 degrees Celsius. That is tech. I think Larry will be able to give you that conversion. He's very good at these conversions, But I tell you one thing, I'm not very good at the conversions, but it's not less than 100 Fahrenheit, that's for sure, Anyway, Larry, well, in terms of the COVID update.
104.
104.
104, I think. I don't know. I'll have to think.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff. I'm impressed, man. So in terms of COVID and the situation, I think the UAE has been the UAE and the GCC in general have been pretty good to react. I think we took measures, or leadership, sort of took measures quite early on, by around about sort of February, and in March there was a sort of a lockdown period, and we went through quite a significant lockdown period for about 2 months, sort of on and off. And then there was an opening again, but it was done very systematically, and communication, and I think the three core reasons I think we've been relatively successful is the leadership, sort of took it very, very seriously right from the beginning, and they reassured the public that look, people's safety is of paramount importance. We don't want the hospitals to become overwhelmed, and we don't want people to get hurt, and we don't want people definitely to sort of really suffer. The second reason, I think, is that they took measures carefully, and they started the disinfection programs, and they got everybody to sort of collaborate, and there was a lot of collaboration between different entities, between different parts of society, to try to come together to try to reduce the impact and the spread of the illness. Then when we opened up, also people now, I mean, there's a campaign which is "We are all responsible," and people, maintain social distance, and they wear the masks. I mean, everybody wears masks everywhere, all the time. Obviously, when you're sitting in a restaurant and stuff like that. But it's become people got quite used to this, and yeah, I think it's careful. However, in the last week or so, last week or 10 days, there's been I wouldn't say a significant increase, but we're getting around about, they're doing about 36, or I can't remember, 36 or 86 thousand kind of tests per day, which is really, really amazing. I think it's around about 36,000 tests per day or something like that. And we got around about 800 cases per day. The recovery rate is very high, and the fatality rate is very, very low. I think the total fatalities here in the UAE have been I think less than 500, if I recall. Anyway,
That's interesting, Wada, because just the province I'm in, British Columbia, just the last 10 days, uh, uptick. They've now closed all of the bars and restaurants at 10 o'clock and limiting the amount of alcohol. Limiting the amount of alcohol seems to be a big help in terms of social distancing for
yeah,
the Canadians. Sad to say, but okay. So
yeah.
so tell me a bit about, like, because here, I mean, I don't want to get into the whole,
But
they take the whole
no,
webinar to talk about the transformation of leadership for HSE in the Middle East over the last 20 years. But um, if you will, maybe just talk a bit about what you've seen in terms of the change at the very senior board of director level for us.
sure, sure. I just wanted to say just one thing about the COVID update. Some people are saying that we opened the schools last 2-3 weeks, and we see this increase in the spike is possibly because of the increase of people going to schools. Although they've been very, 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 very disciplined. But again, we'll watch that space and see what happens. I don't think we're going to go back to a lockdown, but definitely, there are some concerns being raised. Anyway. With regards to leadership, as you said, Larry, I've done a lot of work in the last 10 years with regards to leadership and engaging kind of leadership in driving change. I think Ed and Peter and David have already spoken about the importance of how leadership has really greatly influences the changes that happen in the field, and it's really about kind of felt leadership, really, I think, in the field. I think putting leading indicators for guys to go down to the sites and senior guys to go down to the sites and just walk around, and the worst thing is that when you have a senior leader walking around next to a particular process or next to a particular vessel, and they really, really don't understand what that vessel contains or what that process is all about. I mean, they really should at least I know they're senior people, and then they're too busy with other things. But if you're going to walk around the plant, you should at least sort of understand and have a real understanding of the kind of the business that you're in, right? So that's really important, because the operator or the person in the field will immediately sort of pick on that. In terms of the work that we've done with regards to governance and leadership, a lot of CEOs, and especially in big companies, and as companies sort of grow, companies here in the Middle East or in other places in the world, a lot of companies have become very, very big. They have many companies and subsidiaries within certain companies. The boards of the holding company, or the boards of those companies, play an important role in shaping the appetite for risk, and also defining what is sort of acceptable and what is not acceptable, and what they should be investing in. So it's really, really very, very important. I think from our experience, I read an article once, and I sort of wrote back to the people who wrote the article, and I just thought it was statistically incorrect. But what they said is that, for example, JV boards of JV companies, and that those sort of companies are sort of less safe than companies which haven't got a JV board, because JVs, as we know, are marriages of convenience between different organizations and different people. And sometimes, if the two organizations that come together into this JV the two holding companies that come into this JV or three, whatever, and they don't share the same kind of values. And sort of, I didn't agree with the statistics because I don't think they took a representative sample. So that was the scientific side. But I think I agree qualitatively with their comments on this, because you see, the issue is that when you don't have common values, you know, at the top of the organization, I'm talking right at the top now, you know, and that doesn't percolate down. The CEO, which is, you know, usually either seconded from one of those companies or direct hire of the JV company, is then a bit confused because, you know, he needs to listen to the paymasters. So the board really needs to have a very much a unified message. They might argue on other things like investments and, like, you know, what kind of return on investment they need for expansions and whatever it may be. But when it comes to safety, they really should be speaking the same language. And it's a bit like bringing up your kids, right? I mean, if the mother's saying one thing and the father's saying something else, or the mother's saying something and the father's like saying, yeah, whatever, man, you know, the kids, you know, be very, very confused, you know. So it's the same kind of thing. The CEOs, you know, listen to their directors, and it's really, really important that the directors. So three things to just conclude with. You need to have directors who actually know, and if they're going to walk around the site, and you're going to bring them down to the site, and they're going to come around, and you're going to give them a fresh new pair of safety shoes and a nice little shiny helmet and stuff like that. Before they go on to that site, they really need to go to that safety briefing, but they really need, you know, to be explained to what are the kind of processes are there on site. So the questions that he's asking, he's not going to an operator and saying to him, well, do you feel safe? You know, how do you feel? How's everything? Yeah, is everything all right? You know, really what you need is a director coming there who's sort of making decisions on behalf of the company, sort of coming and talking and says, well, you know, where do you think, do you feel safe? Why do you not feel safe? It must be very hot operating out here. Do you feel worried about the chemicals that you're dealing with and stuff like that? Some of the stuff is a bit dangerous. Are you keeping safe and stuff like that? So there needs to be an empathetic kind of discussion, and there needs to be a discussion that people really kind of believe that, you know, there's some sincerity in the discussion. So that's one thing. The second thing is that obviously when you engage with the board, you need for them to understand where the real risks are, and not sort of fearmonger them into, oh, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And the third thing is that they need to know that they need to feel accountable. They need to feel responsible. I've worked with a lot of boards and board directors who still believe that the HSE person is ultimately the one who needs to make the decisions, and if something goes wrong, then, you know, he's the first one to get hung. And so I think, you know, but on the other hand, I've seen also board directors who really you know, do understand, and they really drive this safety message. It sort of really it really does help to have a board that's engaged. It really, really is. Yeah.
Well,
over to you, Rob. Larry.
Dr. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to come back to this this point about the leaders being engaged or not. And Tag, I don't want to call an audible and throw you right off of the pre-sent questions here, but we've talked about this before. Tag and I've met many plant managers, vice presidents, operations. People, you know, not necessarily, you know, as many CEOs, but certainly, you know, I've 400 or 500 plant managers in my career. And there's no doubt about the ones that are genuinely committed. You can feel it. You can also, if you will, acknowledge that you don't get to be a vice president of operations unless you either do genuinely believe in health and safety, or you have learned how to play dodgeball very, very effectively, because you can't be against health, safety, and the environment and progress up the corporate ladder. So either you're genuinely committed or you've learned how to play dodgeball, but there isn't a lot of middle ground. Now, what I have personally experienced in my career is that the ones that are genuinely committed are genuinely committed because somebody died on their watch somewhere along the way. When they were the midnight shift supervisor 20 years ago, or when they were the yard supervisor 15 years ago, but it didn't seem like it came from spreadsheets and graphs. It seemed to me much more like it came from having to go knock on somebody's door and tell them that their husband or their wife wasn't ever coming home again, which is not any way to go around getting effective, commitment from senior leadership, but statistically, that's almost always been the way it's been. Now, I think things are improving and I think things are changing. Like I said, I've been around for a long time. But Tag, what would you say, first of all, just about that comment there of the plant managers you've met in terms of, the ones that are genuinely committed? How many was it because something really bad happened on their shift? And then, if you could maybe just, sort of the climate in general from your focus groups about the leadership groups and what's, like what Wada was saying, like what's really effective is if you go out there and talk to the people, but it's not effective if you don't have a clue about what they're doing at all or what we even make here in terms of a product, right? So, as long as it's well done, it's great, right? But otherwise, it could be counterproductive.
Right. I think you've posed two really, really interesting questions. The first one, I think what you're talking about is it comes from a value set. And strangely, Pete and I have been talking about this week, actually, that if you have a value for something, it's easy to do, whether that value is recycling or safety or whatever it is. And so you become effectively uncompromising in your standard on that. Now, where that comes from in safety, I know a lot of people have got that value because of an adverse event that they've seen before, they've been involved with before, and that's a hard lesson to learn that way. Right. So there's a responsibility on the rest of us then to make sure that we make sure that people understand that value without having to learn that lesson in that horrible way. But if you talk to people with values about something, doesn't matter what it's about, then you can tell that the way they're talking about it is with passion and with credibility, and that has a huge part of that. But it also plays into the second part of the question, right? Which is, what are organizations, how are they dealing with this felt leadership piece? How's it fit in for them? And what we've seen, interestingly, in the COVID piece, and I've spoken about this before, particularly at the beginning, we were all facing a very common kind of enemy. The leadership was heavily engaged with the front line. That distance, that hierarchical distance, seemed to shrink. The leaders could talk with, they were facing the same problem that the people in the front line were facing and everybody else. So there was, that value and that empathy and that level of trust built up was very, very good for a lot of organizations. The leaders responded very, very well. And what a lot of organizations saw was they saw that they saw their incident rates drop quite dramatically, sort of February, March, April time. So lots of organizations had the best safety performance they've ever had. But then complacency kind of came in, that hierarchical lift started, that gap started to get wider. That communication wasn't as effective then. And then a lot of organizations then had not particularly special performance in terms of safety then in sort of May and June. So, and that ties in very much to that felt leadership piece that, when I'm talking to someone, I'm engaged, that I'm credible, I'm listening to what they're saying, my message is clear, it comes from a location of value. But I also want to, and organizations in the focus groups, they intellectually, they understand that. There's no doubt about it. Most organizations in North America understand that leadership creates culture, and sub-levels of leadership, whether it's supervisors or whatever, have subcultures kind of, and subclimates come from what they do. People understand that. The difficulty is putting it into practice, as Wada has said, and Pete's word was murky for alignment, I think, which made me laugh when I heard it. But it's true. It's creating that alignment, and that's tricky. right? And it gets trickier to back onto something that Wada said. If you've got people, you want people, senior leaders, to have conversations with frontline guys, but they don't really understand maybe what exposures and risks they're facing. They don't really understand what the job entails, and sometimes those conversations are difficult. And it's a skill. It's a skill to be able to open that conversation. And the other thing that comes into that, and it was a word that was used, I think, just when we were talking beforehand, that Pete used. There's a humility that comes in with that, right? Because to enable those conversations as leaders, we do put ourselves potentially in a position where we're vulnerable. I don't really understand what the electrician is doing. I'm not an electrician, right? But I'm concerned about his or her safety. So I have to talk about it from a sense of value, and I have to talk about it. But that potentially makes me look, well, it makes me vulnerable in my knowledge to, I don't really understand the extent of, the risk that they're facing, and that's a hard skill for some leaders to develop and have.
Well, but it's interesting, Teg, that you mentioned just the going out and talking to the electricians. My father's an electrical engineer, but I think somewhere around grade 9, he figured out that I was hopeless with this, said, just because you're good in math and science, whatever you do, Larry, don't become an engineer. So I didn't, right? But so I never really learned very much about electricity. So when I was out talking to electricians on observations, I had that, if you will, anxiety or that apprehension, right? Because I didn't, if they started talking about 480 3-phase or this or that, I was like, yeah, boy, it's like when Hunter starts telling me what to click on the computer when I can't figure out how to make it work, right? I think I'm just such, they're not going to have a lot of instant respect for me, is my thinking, right?
Right.
So I would ask him different questions, though. Like I would say, well, tell me, what do you think would be the most likely way you could get hurt? Or if I asked you, what time of day would it be most likely for you to get hurt if you had to pick out of the shift, right? Or some question that they would only know the answer to, and it would make me sound like it was still a fairly relevant question, right? Another interesting one was, if you were going to predict the next serious injury at this place, I don't want to know who. I want you to tell me where and when it would happen, right?
Yeah.
And that makes them think about all the close calls they've seen and stuff like that. So you can get a lot of mileage. I don't know, mileage. I don't know if kilometerage just doesn't sound right, but it provided you don't set these guys up for specific questions like, are you wearing thick enough rubber gloves to be dealing with 3-phase 480 when you don't really have a clue? Don't get into any of that, right? Or what's more dangerous for you, do you think, driving to work in the morning or driving home when you might, you can certainly help them out with that, with give them some tools like that. Anyhow, Larry, back to the panelists. So yeah, well, Teg, thanks for it. Now, we're kind of into this, David. So just carry on, if you will. How does your leadership group? I mean, I know the answer to some of this because I've been involved with it, but how does your leadership group make their influence felt? What, in your opinion, has worked the best for them? And is it, like I was asking before, more difficult when so many of your people are working at a client's site or mine or at a distance? In other words, they're not even at one of your manufacturing or assembly hubs, whether that be, India, South America, North America, Europe, wherever.
Well, for those people in those sites, I mean, part of it is them being comfortable with their own perspective about their work environment and what it means to them. In other words, there's a certain potential fear one might have to bring things up about a customer's installation that may be seen as judgmental, or, you know, seeing that there's a problem there, but they really have to think about, you know, their own self, of course, in this thing. And one of the things, as I was thinking through a lot of what I was hearing, it reminds me of situations we've experienced where when something really big is present and a near danger, and we know it's a big problem and a potential, everybody's awoke, everybody's aware. The supervisors, for example, that maybe experienced a near fatality or a real fatality, all of a sudden they start pointing, you know, to that and say, I don't want another John Doe event to happen here, or I remember X and Y. The problem is that a lot of times it's the small things that matter. It's not always those big things. It's the other things that we see going on day after day after day that we don't pay much attention to, that in fact are the real nuggets, you know, the close calls and near misses, the things that people need to focus on, that are in fact the thing that will bring you to a safer end result at you know, over time. And so for me, it's that recognition.
Well, David, the one, I mean, I'm just guessing here, but the whole thing about the no live work anymore, was that partially because of the man, like, I think it was a hydraulic hose, right? That man like hit him and he was very serious injury, right? So was that part of it to get that policy going, was to make sure something like that never again? Or
that was really how we got Safestart going, actually, was that event. We've had events in the field of live work where people have gotten their fingers trapped indoors and a unit has moved on them, or a drill rod. You know, they actually have processes where the guy, part of aligning the drill rod is to hold on to it while the guy in the cab is making it turn. Hello, you know, you look at it later, and think, what is that? But that's just the norm. And that's why I say it's those small things that we just take for granted that really are in fact the things that represent the most opportunity within that. And so I think that that's where we really are trying to focus now, because incrementally the big things are obvious and they tend to get attention, but it's the small things that when you start looking at what's really happened, you know, we've seen cases now with this year, for example, where people, because of maybe there being a little less work right now, they've been doing tasks they normally don't do, which would be called non-routine tasks. Well, some of the medical treatment injuries we've have been against those, because the person doing that work didn't really understand all the hazards or did any kind of risk evaluation at that point, and just thought, oh, this is no big deal, I'll just go and do this, and they throw their back out or they do something else. So it's these little things that I think are where we have a lot of opportunity to make the big difference.
Okay. If I could just sort of jump the queue here, Dr. Water, you guys have, I mean, at Enoch anyhow, I think you told me, you know, get up to 50,000 contractors, and that's just Emirates National Oil Company. I know you work with, you know, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, and they've got, you know, sometimes up to 500,000 contractors. How have your leaders been able to get the message out to that many people, transient employees, or do you say, listen, we're not going to really try to capture their hearts and souls here. We're going to be happy enough if they comply with the laws and the rules and the regulations? Or, you know, I'm just curious. Sorry.
It's not a simple question to answer. I mean, Teg knows, he's worked in this part of the world, so he would know very well. I mean, we have a transient population. They speak different languages, speak different dialects. It's very difficult to communicate So what you do is you communicate with the values. So the values are communicated in terms of, on sites, basically, with regards to safety. It's very clear signages that are communicated to try to keep people safe. But I think it all goes down to the contracting strategy. If your contracting strategy starts correctly, and the values that Teg was mentioning before, I mean, you're communicating values again through the contract, through what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and through the expectations that you have, and where you look at safety. So I'll give you an example. There was one, the Expo 2020 is a very big thing. We have a big pavilion that we're building there, and one of the things that it was very interesting, because the head of sort of the engineering department reports to an executive director, and they were supposed to be building something. So this is really a fit out kind of structure that they're building, and we're really not involved in the design. The design is done especially by a very specific type of designer. Our engineering team really just oversees some of the stuff. And when they came, and in the original contract, they looked at the organization, said, "Where's the safety guy?" And they said, "Yeah, we've got a safety guy who comes around, once or twice a week and sort of has a look at the site." And the executive director that I've worked with for many years, he said, "No, that's unacceptable. We need to have someone on site, because he's doing the trainings, looking at the safety, doing the safety checks every morning, every evening, because he's been involved in leading projects in the past." And they said, "Well, it's not part of the contract." He said, "I don't care." And they said, "Well, we'll have to issue a variation." He said, "Yeah, of course, issue a variation. Doesn't matter. We need a safety guy on site." And luckily that did happen, because we did have an accident on site where actually it wasn't the contractors, it was the subcontractor. It was one of the scaffolding team, and one guy dropped a rod, and luckily it sort of it did injure a guy, but it could have been much worse if he wasn't wearing a safety helmet. So he got a bit injured, but he was all right in the end. So the most important thing, and when you're dealing with a massive number of contractors, what you'll find here in the Middle East is that you have this massive number of contractors. There is a main contractor, and then there's about another 5 to 10 subcontractors. So the best way to do this is to actually, so the Expo 2020 guys, and I know the VP of Safety very well. As you know, I've got a book on the 10-step MBA that we've spoken about. So the guy, my co-author there, he's the VP there, and he was telling me that, and I was involved in sort of doing some reviewing some safety submissions for some safety awards. And the subcontractors, and they're very careful about setting the standards for contractors and subcontractors, and actually holding the main contractors accountable regardless. You can't come and say, "Well, that was the subcontractor who got injured." He said, no, you've got the main contract. So the subcontractors actually go through a vetting process as well. The communication and the accountability for communication still goes with the main contractor. So I told you, it's a non-easy question to answer. In the oil and gas sector, it's not only the construction. If you've got contractors sitting on site, especially if it's a brownfield or it's a live, for example, plant or a refinery or whatever, they go through a lot of safety training, and they usually ask for contractors who've worked on sites like this before, because you're working next to live plant and stuff like that. So it's not only about the construction safety side of things, but it's also understanding the oil and gas kind of safety. So I hope that answers the question, Larry.
Well, no, excellent, and thanks. Sorry for springing it out of sequence from the prepped questions, if you will, or the ones I sent you guys. But look, we just got a couple minutes, so my guess is that most of the folks watching would like to know, how what's the best way maybe to get senior managers more involved and more engaged. I threw my 2 cents worth in, which is gives them some tools that they can see using effectively that would work well, and you'll likely get them to do more of it. Give them something to do that they think might embarrass them or look awkward, and they're likely going to find other things to do with their time. So, but if you guys could just, from your experience, I'll start with you, Ed, but maybe sort of 30, 45 seconds, just what have you seen work best that you can offer these, like a safety professional could offer their senior leader, that would get the movement in the right direction?
Well, if you go out and if you go out and you really take a look at safety, where the safety transition has gone since the early 70s to where we're at today, we've done a really good job at compliance. We have all of our processes in place. We have all of our training in place. We've crossed our T's and dotted our I's. We've done a really good job in compliance. But what we haven't done a really good job is developing that competence around leadership. Leadership and how it relates to safety, how it relates to quality. And when you think about leadership, if you think about change, that means the employees have to do things different. That means that the manager that's actually trying to drive the change has to lead differently. So you have to really go out and you have to understand what leadership aptitudes or leadership competence really is. And then you got to answer that, what's in it for me, to that manager, so that they buy into this. And if you take a look at the industry, we haven't done a very good job around safety leadership. And to the gentleman from the Emirates, he points it out. They've never really been asked to be truly engaged, because that's always been the HSE role. So we have to make that shift in the mindset.
Well, if you put it that way, Ed, it's perfectly simple, isn't it? If you want to improve, people will have to change. They can't get better just doing what they're doing. If you want the employees to change, which is where they're not likely going to change without the leadership changing. So, it does, if you look at it that way, it's pretty straightforward for sure. David, what about you in terms of your leadership group was committed already, but what have they done? What have they done that's been the most effective, do you think, in terms of the message out there to the employees?
Well, the old story about the chicken and the pig watching the guy eat breakfast, ham and eggs, and the chicken says, "I was involved in that breakfast." The pig says, "Yeah, but I'm committed." So you really have to get engaged. And I think the thing that they've done best is, through whether it's Rate Your State, or whether it's just talking the language and listening and saying, what can we do to make this a better and a safer workplace? What is it you need? What is it that we lack? What is it, if there's one thing you could change today, what would you change? Leaving it open. People have a lot of ideas and people have a lot of opinions, and they'll keep it in the break room, or they'll keep it outside the four walls of your company if you let it stay there. But if you actually ask with humility and care, you will find out a lot of interesting things, and that really is the value. We say we value our people, but we have to value their knowledge as well. And the only way to find out what they're thinking is to give them an opportunity to tell you.
So again, getting them out there and getting them to talk to those people. It's certainly one of the things that I would try to do is I would try to take the plan. I'm there to teach them how to make safety observations, at least as the first 12, 15 years of my career. And I try to take the plant manager out and engage him with somebody that I had already done an observation with, who I thought actually had his or her head screwed on pretty straight, and get into a meaningful conversation with the plant manager and that employee, so that he or she would hear it just the way I heard it. And then hopefully they would find intrinsic value for the time spent and go do it when I wasn't there, because I knew that there wasn't like they had a boss to make them do it. If I didn't get an intrinsic value for this activity and time spent, it wasn't like they were ever going to have anybody make them do it, right? So,
Yep.
But again, back to what you said in the last webinar, the people out there that are actually out there all the time at the front lines, some of them will be biased, some of them will have an axe to grind, but if you can find the people who are going to give you the fair message, if you will, that's probably the most reliable. And obviously get a senior manager to hear that is going to create a lot of value for the activity. Again, Pete, we don't have a ton of time here. Pretty soon, Hunter and other people will be saying, "Hey, come on, you got to wrap this up." But what at AES or even since then have you seen work best in terms of things health and safety professionals could do to get more, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, current, voltage, amperage out of the senior leaders?
Okay, a couple prongs to that answer, Larry. Thanks for the question. And the first one is, I like to try to engage with the senior leaders and have them understand the importance of seeing human, right? Kind of the leader as a servant mentality. And some ways that we've been successful at doing that is being deliberate when you go out in the field, kind of share the pain type of thing. Don't go do your observations on a sunny day close to the favorite restaurant. Get out there and go to some of the more difficult jobs, and people appreciate that. Kind of building on what David said. The other thing is, going off shift, right? Normally we do senior leaders, the higher up you get on the ladder, the more important it is to go on second shift. And you're going to hear some of those things that David alluded to. People are going to be more open, more apt to tell you what's really on their mind if you open up your ears and do it in a non-traditional type of way where folks are used to seeing the senior leaders. And then last thing that I would say that's been very successful for engaging senior leaders is, as safety professionals, as leaders, we want to be knowledgeable of the theory, the academic work that's being done, but being able to translate that into tactical plans with the knowledge of your individual organization can be hugely valuable, not only to improve your performance, but to get the senior leadership buy-in into those programs that you develop.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Ted. And just if you will, anything that you've sort of heard that golden nuggets. I mean, nothing. There's no magic wand here. Okay, go for it, Ted. Just. I don't know about being able to wrap that much up, but I mean, what
well, there's what's the saying? There's gold in them there hills, is it? There's I mean, you look at it's a complex subject. Let's not run away from that, right? We're talking about leadership, we're talking about culture, we're talking about impact, we're talking about accountability, we're talking about humility, we're talking about all sorts of different stuff. But there's definitely gold in some of these comments, and I've got pages here. I'll just rattle through a few. The importance of humility has been mentioned by Pete, Water, and David, and as you said, Larry, then the skills that to open up dialogue and those sort of things. That piece at the end from Pete saying leaders going out and doing awkward stuff and where they're not expected, that's huge. That's a huge statement in itself, right? And because that shows value, that shows commitment, that shows intent. Right, and then taking responsibility for the information that you come back, and as David was talking about, as Ed was talking about, making those changes and trying to address some of those issues that come up. Everyone talked about the importance of one-to-one dialogue to drive that engagement. There was a big piece on credibility too, and to be credible leaders in this space, not only do we have to talk from a space of value, but also, we have to make sure that our actions, what we do ourselves, show that is a value for us and why it's important for us as well. And also, the example that Wada gave about, the variation on the contract example, actually, that's another example of how you're showing your value and showing it's important and serious to you. That kind of message goes out much wider across the organization. There's is it jungle drums is a phrase. People hear that stuff and they understand actually the organization's serious about this. They're serious about safety. They're making these changes, all those sort of things. There's one other thing I want to pick up on, two actually. There's the first is Pete said right at the beginning, the difference between quality and quantity of interaction. And they're both important, but the quality of the interaction is paramount. And we've all seen systems where there's lots of interaction, but the quality is poor. People know it's plastic, right? And that actually becomes counterproductive. So the quality of the interaction is critical. And the last thing I want to loop on is something that Ed said, actually, that, it brings a different kind of responsibility and a different kind of relationship between the safety leaders, the safety department, and the more corporate leadership, if you like. You know, how we have to advise and support these individuals, make sure they got the right skills, enable them to have these conversations, make that easy for them so that they can get what they want, which is, you know, organizational reliability and safety from that. And I think I've now spoken enough, Larry, so I'll be quiet
No,
now.
it's okay. I just got the after Teg try to wrap it up. But no, but thank you very much, Teg. As I think that you know, interestingly enough, what I also get out of these expert panels, surprisingly, and like there's different ideas, but there almost always seems to be a bit of a consensus theme from you gentlemen as well too. In other words, you know, well, here's what I think is the best. Here's what I think, and well, next thing you know, it's all of us think, well, that's the best. Interesting. I didn't know that. I just knew that was what was the most reliable for me. So, I mean, I know we're not a, you know, we represent a lot of companies and what we've heard. We're certainly not the universe here, but it would seem to me that if you wanted to wrap this up, it is the best thing you can probably do as a health and safety practitioner is with, as Wada said, the right amount of prep, because it's going to vary, obviously, depending on where you're going, right? But with the right amount of prep, get out there and talk to the people and get engaged on a meaningful basis, and both parties will benefit significantly. And it's visible and it's tangible and it's credible and likely, especially if you're going out and you don't know too much about it, the humility would likely be a little more natural, and you wouldn't end up with, if you will, the equivalent of the pointy-haired manager in Dilbert, you know, walking out saying, I think we have a problem with my firewall because my laptop's heating up. You know, that's not the kind of thing you want the guy saying around the reactor or something else, like you were saying, Wada, you know, where you're just obvious, you don't even have a clue, right? You know, if that thing blows up, you're a dead man and you don't even know it. That's not going to help either. But provided they're prepped properly, that's probably where you're going to get the most leverage as a health and safety professional. So again, gentlemen, thank you so much for this. In another month, and we'll certainly get a new round of, if you will, registrations out to everybody. We will have a new another series of 4 expert panel webinars. Certainly, I'm hoping that those of you that are on with us today can join us, and maybe as well Ken Tootin and John McGilvery, Anthony, if he can come back from Procter & Gamble. But the first one is recordable injuries have come down, but serious injuries have not. Why? And I think we could all comment on that, whether we're all right or not, and whether or not there'll be a consensus on that would be, again, very, very interesting, especially around the world. The next one is excellent safety equals excellent business performance. And again, why? And we all know good safety equals good business performance because accidents cost money. But excellent safety equaling excellent performance requires a different paradigm. And there's a lot of senior managers who get it, but I don't think they understand why, which would be, again, very interesting. Now, the third one is preventing serious injuries and fatalities for young workers and old workers. Almost all of us have trouble with the young workers. But as I remember, you know, most of my career started out in the bush with forest products companies and in the oil patch with oil rigs and stuff, right? And I remember in the oil patch, they'd always say, Larry, the young guys get hurt more than the old guys, but it's the old guys that die. So obviously the way you're going to talk to a young worker, though, might be different than an older worker with 20, 30 years experience who knows how to do the job better than you'll ever know how to do the job. So I think that one, again, would be very interesting. These are the two highest categories for serious injuries and fatalities, the young workers and the old workers. And the last one in this series of 4, and Dr. Wada, you and I've talked about this a lot, balancing just culture and accountability in the real world. You know, I remember one of senior associate you were telling me, Wada, saying, you know, the only way you can hold them accountable, the executives, is for performance. But then, you know, at what, you know, when you've only got 4 people working for you, you know, now obviously somebody slipping and falling is the end of your career. And unless you could have somehow caught them like one of your children, that seems to be a bit unfair. So, you know, how do you balance just culture with accountability? And I think we'd all agree, no accountability is not a good idea either, right? So I'm hoping you can all join me for this next series of 4. They will probably be a month from today. I don't want to say again, same time, same channel. I think I said before, same bat time, same bat channel, but apparently that dated me way too badly. So, hey, David, I should probably not go with the Adam West and Burt Ward again. But guys, thanks again very much for this. Everybody that tuned in, thank you again for tuning in. And I hope we see you all again for the next series of 4. And we can delve into these 4 additional topics. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. Okay. Talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye.
Hi, guys. Thanks, Ari. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.